In our Gobekli Tepe series so far, we've uncovered some incredible findings. We learned how this ancient site was discovered by accident, explored the pillars and layout, and even examined its astounding age. But there is one major question left. Who were the builders of Gobekli Tepe? This is episode 4 of our Gobekli Tepe series, and today we'll be answering that. But first, if you haven't seen episodes 1, 2, and 3, go check them out. Also, make sure to hit subscribe to be notified when the final episode of this series comes out. In episode 5, we will explore what really happened to Gobekli Tepe. So make sure to stay tuned. So in this video, we'll answer the question, who were the builders of Gobekli Tepe? There are two main theories most archaeologists seem to agree on. These are the more mainstream theory and the alternative theory. Within those two theories, however, there are many details that contradict each other. So which one is true? Let's dive right in. The mainstream theory is that the builders of Gobekli Tepe were nomadic hunter-gatherers who transitioned to early agriculture. After all, archaeological evidence does show that they did eventually settle down and farm, but there's a skills and knowledge gap between primitive hunting and gathering tools and the highly technical skills needed to build Gobekli Tepe. We know these people used stone tools because archaeologists have found a few stone tools near the site, but stone tools are not really advanced enough to cut down trees, transport massive stone pillars, and carve intricate designs on them. It would take hundreds of years just to create all those tools. Then it would take thousands of hours of labor to use those primitive tools to do all the work that went into building the site. That's not to mention the advanced knowledge needed to understand astronomy and embed that knowledge into the very structure of the site. On top of that, the same primitive tools wouldn't have been able to quarry the stone in the first place. All around the site, you can see quarry marks showing exactly where the builders removed the stones from the ground. Many of the pillars themselves still have dirt and grass stuck to them from when they grew in the ground. Archaeologists have also found animal bones and broken tools at these quarry sites, meaning that it took a lot of time and effort to remove the pillars from the ground. Again, this would have taken an incredibly long time using only primitive Stone Age technology. But perhaps the biggest skills and knowledge gap is the possible use of cranes. Cranes are machines used to lift heavy objects. Modern cranes are typically used to build modern skyscrapers and bridges. But archaeologists think that cranes may have been used at Gobekli Tepe too. It's hard to imagine how else they would have been able to lift these massive pillars and set them up perfectly in a circle. This all sounds impossible, but according to the mainstream theory, these nomadic hunter-gatherers managed to do it all without any advanced knowledge or technology. That's because the mainstream theory says that they simply kept improving their tools over hundreds or thousands of years until they eventually created tools capable of building the site. But there is no evidence that they did this. Their stone tools never advanced beyond the size and shape of a fist. If they slowly improved their tools over time, we should find evidence of this in the archaeological record. But we don't. Instead, we find very simple tools made from rocks that were picked up off the ground. This doesn't prove that they couldn't have built Gobekli Tepe, however. It just means that they didn't do it with the stone tools we've found. Maybe they used tools made from a different material like wood, or maybe they developed new methods for using those primitive stone tools that we just haven't discovered yet. In fact, we do have some evidence for this. At the bottom of a nearby lake, researchers found the remnants of a wooden structure. If they had developed more advanced technology like levers and pulleys, then they would have likely used wood. Wood is a much more versatile building material than stone. It can bend and flex, making it easier to use for construction. They could have even used the wood from trees they selectively grew around the site just for this purpose. Another clue that they may have used advanced techniques comes from the pillars themselves. One pillar has a groove carved into it. It looks similar to a piece of wood that's been smoothed down by a sharp tool. This carving technique is called microflake technology. Microflakes are tiny pieces of rock that have been chipped away from a stone. When struck properly, these microflakes can produce extremely fine shavings. With enough practice, these shavings can be smooth and polished. This technique takes lots of practice and skill to master, but the results can be quite beautiful. Although we don't know what the pillar was originally carved from, this type of carving is definitely not primitive. To be fair, however, this could have just been done with a normal stone tool. It just seems strange that they would take so much time and effort to carve a single pillar that way. It seems like they could have just used a wood tool and saved themselves the trouble. Unfortunately, we can't know for sure without more evidence. What's interesting about Gobekli Tepe is that there isn't a lot of evidence contradicting the mainstream theory. Sure, there are some strange things that don't quite fit, but there's nothing definitive pointing towards another theory. That might be because the builders tried their best to hide any evidence that would point towards a more advanced culture. Or it might just be because they weren't very technologically advanced. If they were trying to hide evidence of an advanced culture, they did a good job. Typically, when archaeologists find a site with evidence of a lost civilization, there are tons of clues pointing towards an advanced culture. For example, there are often huge temples or palaces. There are also usually signs of metal tools and weapons, but at Gobekli Tepe, we don't find anything like that. The only structures we've found so far are circles of pillars. There is no evidence of any palaces or large buildings. The builders also seem to have avoided using metals like copper, bronze, and gold. Although they may have used advanced techniques and possibly had a complex society, there's no evidence of any sort of advanced technology. This brings us to the alternative theory, which is the lost civilization hypothesis. This theory basically says that the builders of Gobekli Tepe were part of a larger, more advanced civilization, one that used much more advanced tools and techniques. Their society may have been complex, with leaders, organized labor, and even slaves. This would explain how they were able to build such an impressive structure using seemingly primitive tools. They could have come from a long line of builders who passed down their skills and knowledge through generations. They could have even invented some amazing new techniques that allowed them to build the pillars without using cranes. However, after the site was abandoned, their society was wiped out by a cataclysm. After all, it seems odd that such an advanced site would just be abandoned. Then later, nomadic hunter-gatherers arrived and began using the pillars for their own rituals. In fact, archaeologists have already found evidence that the site was destroyed by a flood. This would explain why there's a layer of silt covering the entire site. It would also explain why they stopped building at the site, and it would even explain why the site was never used again. But the idea of a lost civilization doesn't explain how such a sophisticated culture could have disappeared without leaving behind any evidence. After all, a culture like this probably wouldn't have vanished overnight. There would have been at least some evidence of their culture surviving into the future. But there isn't. To be fair, though, there's also no evidence that they didn't exist. Sure, we don't find a lot of evidence of advanced civilizations before 3000 BC, but that doesn't mean that they didn't exist. After all, Gobekli Tepe itself pushes back the timeline of human settlements by at least 6,000 years. It's entirely possible that human societies developed in multiple areas and reached similar levels of development independently. The problem with this is that the builders of Gobekli Tepe left no written records. If they did, we may have already uncovered them, and that could have solved a lot of the mysteries surrounding this site. But since we don't have any records, we can't determine whether or not they had a complex society. So which theory is true? Did the builders of Gobekli Tepe come from a lost civilization, or were they just ordinary nomadic hunter-gatherers who somehow built the impossible? Well, based on the evidence we've found so far, both theories could be true. They may have started out as simple nomadic hunter-gatherers, but over time, they may have developed more advanced technologies and formed a complex society. Of course, this is just a theory, but keep in mind that the mainstream theory has yet to explain many of the details surrounding the site. To explain the site, The mainstream theory has to assume that a group of nomadic hunter-gatherers magically developed the ability to build such an amazing site. But in reality, this is just pushing the timeline of human development back farther, which creates more questions than it answers. Ultimately, we need to find more evidence before we can definitively say which theory is true, but luckily, we won't have to wait long. In Episode 5 of our Gobekli Tepe series, we'll explore what really happened to Gobekli Tepe, and in that episode, we'll reveal one theory that could change history books forever. So make sure to subscribe so you're notified when it comes out. Also, do you believe Gobekli Tepe's builders were simple hunters or something more? Let us know in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.